The idea of a surprise volcanic eruption is terrifying. Usually there's some kind of advance warning, but Mount Marapi in Indonesia works a little differently.
Mount Marapi, known as the Mountain of Fire, thunders to life again.
It caught hikers off guard this past weekend. 75 people were caught underneath a column of burning ash spewing 3,000 meters into the air. And if you want to see what that looks like, to be caught in it, we can show that to you, but I'll warn you, it's really unsettling and hard to watch. That's Zafira Fabrina. We'll talk more about her in a second, because she was rescued from the volcano. But let's understand first how these hikers got into this brutal situation in the first place. Mount Marapi, which means Mountain of Fire, is among the most active of Indonesia's volcanoes. It's in western Sumatra and sits right on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where you have lots of volcanic and seismic activity. So let's talk about why this eruption came as a surprise. And there are actually two main theories. One is if the reporting out there is true, that this was a shallow magma volcano. So what does that mean exactly? Well, normally the magma chamber, which sort of drives the eruption, can be quite deep underground, maybe many kilometers below the surface. But a shallow magma chamber makes for a much more unpredictable volcano. A big reason, less distance to travel, right? Less time to detect movement. So instead of having hours or even days of advance notice, maybe you have much less than that.
Hundreds of people have descended on Indonesia's Mount Marapi to help the survivors of a deadly volcanic eruption.
But there's another theory about how an eruption can catch so many people off guard, and that's if this was a steam eruption. So let's say you have the magma kind of bubbling below the surface, pushing upwards. It could come into contact with groundwater just above.
And that steam pressure then builds up at a very shallow level in the volcano until it's at a point where, it's like a pressure cooker and it can't keep that pressure in anymore, and then the eruption happens.
That's Paul Ashwell, and that's his last name. He's a volcano guy, and he's going to help us fill in the blanks here as we go. So he says these steam eruptions, as may be the case here, that they often come with very little warning, and that they've definitely happened before.
In 2014 in Japan, Mount Marapi was an example of a similar eruption to what I suspect this was too as well, and also led to the deaths of about 60 people. And then in White Island in Whakaari in New Zealand, there was also a phreatic eruption where people were in the crater of the volcano, also led to about a dozen or so deaths there as well. And in both of those cases, in Japan and in New Zealand, there was no usable warning before it erupted.
And have a look at what Indonesia's own volcanology officials have to say. Because we cannot record any seismic activity, the volcano gives no clear sign if it is going to erupt. It may be a few days until we know which theory is true, but the end result is the same in both cases. And I say this at the risk of repeating myself. A surprise eruption is terrifying. It does seem like no one saw this eruption of Mount Marapi coming. And I say this eruption because it erupted once already this year. Hiking trails were closed for about half of 2023, only reopening during the summer. And since 2011, Mount Marapi has been on the second alert level of a 4-step warning scale, as in they were aware of a generally elevated risk, but had no idea how imminent the threat really was.
Remember that Marapi has been active since January. An eruption then didn't cause casualties, but this has been building up.
Rescuers did manage to pull 52 people off the mountain after the initial eruption on Sunday, stretchered out, many with severe burns. And that's where we catch back up with 19-year-old Zafira Fabrina. She was caught in the blast of hot dust and ash and recorded a video pleading to her mom for help. She was on a hiking trip with 18 school friends and is now reportedly in hospital getting treatment for burns. Another video shows another hiker in distress. But 23 other people didn't make it, either found dead or presumed dead.
To Indonesia now, and rescuers have recovered 9 more bodies from Mount Marapi.
The head of the local rescue service told reporters they don't expect to find more survivors because anyone they haven't already pulled off the mountain was probably too close to the mouth of the volcano and that explosion of hot ash and gas.
This steam is kept underground at much hotter temperatures, maybe 300 or 400 degrees temperatures. So if you're caught in that steam cloud with that and volcanic ash, it's not going to be very good at all. If you're a little bit outside of that, then you might get severe burns. And we do know that the survivors have suffered pretty severe burning.
You can imagine the work of rescuers is incredibly dangerous. They actually had to pause the effort to recover bodies at one point because, according to officials, the volcano erupted 5 more times on Tuesday. The weather has also made things tough. Way too much rain, which makes the mountain's surface very slippery.
Itu kendala cuaca. Kedua, kendala medan yang masih adanya gerusan angin yang membawa erupsi panas itu. Jadi kita tidak mengambil dengan mudah jenazah ini atau untuk dievakuasi pada saat ini.
Meanwhile, all that ash has virtually blotted out the sun. There's so much of it, you can't even see the top of the plume through the clouds. But the search continues. The search for answers, too. Technically, because of the danger level, nobody should have been within 3 kilometers of the peak. And anyone who was on the mountain had to register ahead of time. But local officials acknowledged people sometimes climb higher than they're supposed to. And while the Volcanology Agency says our job is to issue safety warnings, they say it's up to local authorities to enforce them.